So we should be live. It's a bit late there. Shalom, shalom, shalom. As always, first I want to give all the praises and the glory to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, and to His only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ. Double honors to the apostles and to the elders of Great Millstone. Shalom to you, and shalom to the hopefully elect brothers and sisters of the house of Israel. As the scripture says, many are called, few are chosen. The chosen are the elect of the children of Israel. The Bible refers to them as the remnant or the saints. Today, we're going to go into a little bit of history, all right? We're going to tackle remnant or the saints. We're going to tackle the book of Daniel, chapter 11, all right? And we're going to do the whole chapter. The whole chapter of Daniel's chapter 11, we're going to go through today, all right? So, all praises and glory. Today is what? The 5th of May, 2025. We're quite a few, nearly halfway through the year. Can you believe it? Nearly halfway through the year. So, Daniel chapter 11, all right? So Daniel chapter 11, before we go into it, I'll give you like a quick synopsis. Daniel chapter 11 is basically, it's the prophetic history, as you can see from the title, which is given from the Persian to the Greek Empire and up into the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, all right? Now, the accuracy of these prophecies will give courage to you Israelites, the elect should do, all right? But it was Daniel is telling the history ahead of its time, basically. This is why it's called prophetic prophecies, all right? So it's, we're going to go into it. We're going to go into it from verse 1. I think it's down to, that's it. Let me just check how many verses are in here. Verse 45. So get your pens and papers out, your pads and pens and paper, because we're going to be here for a little while tackling this whole chapter, because there's a lot of history in this chapter that we need to go into, all right? So, we're going to go from Alexander the Great, from the Persian kings, Alexander the Great, all the way down to times of the Diadoches, which are the 4 generals of Alexandria, all the way through to, the Ptolemies and the Seleucid Empire, to do with Antiochus Epiphanes, so forth and so on, right? We're going to go through the whole chapter. Now, as I said before, the whole of the book of Daniel's chapter 11 has already taken place. There is not a single prophecy in Daniel's chapter 11 that's to come in these end times that we're living in. Every single prophecy in the book of Daniel's chapter 11 has been fulfilled, right? And we're going to take you through that step by step, verse by verse. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to give you a full screen. We're going to get my ugly mug off the screen, and we're going to give you, the audience, a full screen so we can go into this properly, all right? So you've had the introduction. Let's do it. All right, so Daniel's chapter 11, verse 1. It says, also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him, right? Now, it's the angel of the Lord that dictated these prophecies to Daniel, all right? That dictated these prophecies to Daniel in this, right? So Daniel is saying, basically, he stood firm to receive these prophecies from the angel of the Lord, all right? So verse 2, it says, and now I will show thee the truth, right? It says, behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Now, what we need to do now, we're going to identify who these 3 kings are and who the 4th king is that the angel was speaking about, that Daniel wrote about, basically in this verse 2 here, all right? So, the 4 kings, the 3 kings when it says there, but behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. All right. So the 3 kings are Cambyses II is the first king. The second one is they refer to him as his Poseido. They call him Smerdis, but he's also known as Bardia, right? Bardiya. And the third king, the third Persian king, is Darius the Great. All right. So, and then we're going to tackle the fourth. The fourth shall be far richer than all, and by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. All right. So the fourth king is Xerxes the First, also known as Ahasuerus in the book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1. So let's just bring that information out first and foremost. All right. So this is the first king here. So the first king out of the 3 Persian kings is this person here, Cambyses II. All right. Now he did reign for a short while alongside Cyrus the Great. All right, Cambyses II, but it is Cambyses II who it's speaking of. All right. Now, because even I used to be a bit confused, thinking was it Cyrus the Great, basically in that, but I believe it is Cambyses II is the first king. All right. Of these 3 Persian kings that we're speaking of here in Daniel chapter 11, is Cambyses II is the first one. All right. So that's him there. We're not going to go into details of him because we don't need to. The second one was the successor. See here, Bardia. All right, also known as Smerdis, Smerdis. I think that was like a what they call it, like a Persuado. I think that's what they call it when you have a thing of a name like that. Persuado. I think that's what they call it, like like another name that they use for someone, like a false name. Use a number of times, yeah. So he was also known as Smerdis, all right, but his title was Bardia. Oh, there it says it there. So I didn't realize it there. There you go. Or Smerdis. See, there you go. It actually says it there. All right. So some people knew him as Smerdis. All right. That was the second of the Persian kings out of the 3 in Daniel chapter 11, verse 2 that we're dealing with, right? I'm going to hit each verse at a time. All right. So he was where was it? It says here. It says possibly died 522 BC, also known as Tanio Oxus, Old Persian, by Cyrus, was the son of Cyrus the Great and the younger brother of Cambyses II. All right, both Persian kings, as you can see here, the younger brother of Cambyses II. All right, so Cambyses II was the first king out of these 3 Persian kings. All right, so I don't believe it was talking about Cyrus the Great. It's talking about Cambyses II as these 4 kings that we're going to go into. All right, but he did reign for a short while alongside his father. So he was, as you can see, Cambyses II was the second king of the kings of Archimedean Empire. He was the son and successor of Cyrus the Great, and his mother was Cassandra. His relatively brief reign was marked by his conquest in North Africa, not in Egypt. All right. So you've got Cyrus the Great and Cambyses II, but it is Cambyses II that it's talking about. So the second one is Bardia and Smerdis, and then the third one is, where is it? Bardia. The third one should be, is it Darius the Great? I'm thinking of third king. So Darius. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, first, second, third, Darius the Great. Let's just put this here. Oh, we're on Darius the Great. Sorry, I didn't realize that. As I'm looking, I'm thinking, where am I? We're actually on Darius the Great. So this is the third one, Darius the Great. I was looking for him, but I didn't realize I actually had him up on the screen already. So lucky. That's me losing my mind there. So the third one is Darius the Great. All right, that's the third one. Darius the Great. So that tackles, when we go back to, so lucky for that, my family. I confused myself there. I didn't realize I was on Darius the Great's page already. So that tackles who the first three are. When it says, behold, there were three kings in Persia. Those were the three that is speaking about. Cambyses, the second Smerdis, also Bardidia, also known as Smerdis, and Darius the Great. Now the fourth king, it says, now there shall be a fourth, which shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Gracia. All right. So the fourth king is let's change the tab. The fourth king is Xerxes the First, commonly known as Xerxes the Great, was a Persian ruler who served as the fourth king of the kings of the Archimedean Empire. It is even showing you here, see? Was a Persian ruler who served as the fourth king of kings of the Archimedean Empire, reigning from 486 BC until his assassination in the 465 BC. He was the son of Darius the Great and Atossa, a daughter of Cyrus the Great, right? So, and it goes into about, this is the Xerxes that's in the film 300, right? It's the same Xerxes in that film 300. In Western history, Xerxes is best known for his invasion of Greece in 480 BC, which ended in Persian defeat, right? Xerxes was designated successor by Darius over his older brother Artaxerxes and inherited a large multi-ethnic empire upon his father's death. All right, so this is the same Xerxes. I believe if we go down to here, let me just see. Position to the throne, consolidation of power, campaigns. Yeah. So this is the same. If you've ever seen the film 300, this is the same Xerxes here. It speaks of this. Is here. Xerxes set out in the spring of 480 BC from Sardis with a fleet, an army which Herodotus, who was a historian, definitely a Jake, all right, estimated was roughly 1 million strong, with 10,000 elite warriors named the Immortals. If you remember that in the film 300, they showed you the Immortals, the 1 million army that Xerxes had when he was coming up against the Spartans, right? It says the Immortals, or Persian Immortals, was the name given by the Greek historian Herodotus to a 10,000 strong unit of elite heavy infantry in the Archimedean army. They served in the dual capacity, operating as an imperial guard and contributing to the ranks of the standing army. All right, you see all that in the movie 300. If you've ever seen that, if you've ever seen that movie 300, it's with that guy, what's his name, Gerald Butler, who plays one of the Spartan kings, I believe. It says more recent estimates place the Persian force at around 60,000 combatants, right? So this is that Xerxes that you see in the movie 300. Now, when we go back to the scriptures, so how do we identify him in the scriptures as well? It says, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Gracia, all right? So we saw that. This is it here. Let's go back to him again, sorry. So this is what he did. Invasion of the Greek mainland. When Darius died while in the process of preparing a second army to invade the Greek mainland, leaving to his son the task of punishing the Athenians, which are the Spartans, the Naxians, and the Erythraeans for their interference in the Ionian revolt, the burning of Sardis, and their victory over the Persians at Marathon. That's where you get the Marathon from today. I always hear Apostle Hart speak about that when he says the man that he ran from the Battle of Marathon to tell the Greeks, the Greeks at the time, that they had defeated the Persians. That's why it says they had victory over the Persians at the Marathon. And that's the Battle of Marathon that took place in 490 BC during the first Persian invasion of Greece. It was fought between the citizens of Athens, aided by the Plataeans, and the Persian force commanded by Datis and Artaphernes. All right. And that's where we get the marathon today. We just had it, I think last week it was in London. They had the London Marathon was run last week, 25.5 miles. They say it's 26, but 25.5 miles. That's where it goes back to. The Greek soldier that ran from the Battle of the Marathon back to Greece, back to Athens, to tell them that the Greeks had defeated the Athenians had defeated the Persians, he ran that whole journey from there, and this is where we get the term marathon from today. You've got the Boston Marathon, the New York Marathon, the London Marathon. It all goes back to this, the Battle of the Marathon that the Greek soldier ran all the way back to his king to tell him that they had defeated the Persians. So that's just a little bit of history. I always hear Apostle Taha always talk about that. So I thought, let me just bring it up here. So this is the thing. So it says, so this is the battle. This is according to the Greek historian Herodotus, Xerxes' first attempt to bridge the Hellespont ended in failure when a storm destroyed the flax and the papyrus cables of the bridges. In retaliation, Xerxes ordered the Hellespont, the strait itself, whipped 300 times and had fetters thrown into the water. Xerxes' second attempt to bridge the Hellespont was successful. So this is his invasion of Greece. This goes back here when it says here, when he came up against Grecia, which was all of these people here that make up what they would call the Grecian Empire. So when we go back to the scriptures, this is how we know who he's talking about, the fourth king here, when it says he stirred up all the realm against Grecia. And also when it says, this is another information clue, whatever you want to call it, that makes you able to identify Xerxes as the fourth king. He says, he shall be far richer than them all, and by his strength and through his riches he shall stir up against the realm of the Gracia. If we go to, I think it's the book of Esther, chapter 1. This is the same person. We'll just share this tab here. So when you go to the book of Esther, chapter 1, verse 1, when it says the banquets of the kings, it says, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. So this is the Hebrew pronunciation of Xerxes, right? Ahasuerus, right? This is Ahasuerus, which reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 170 and 20 provinces. This is Xerxes the first, right? But this is the Hebrew pronunciation of the word Xerxes, I believe. We'll look into it, but I believe that's what it is. That's why it says Ahasuerus. It says that in those days when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the palace, right? In the third year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media. And you know, the Medea or Media goes back to Mediah, which are the sons, these are the descendants of Japhet, these people here, all right? We won't go into that, but that's who they are. The Persians are the descendants of Elam, all right? So you've got Shem and you've got Japhet. And I think you've got the prophecy where it talks about how Japhet shall live in the tents of Shem. Let me just see if I can quickly find that one. Hold on. In the tents. I believe that's what it says about Japhet living in the tents of Shem, because that's who they are. Yeah, here it is. Found you. I'll quickly show you it. We're not going to go into it, but I'll quickly show you it. So this is Genesis chapter 9, verse 27. It says, the Most High Yahweh shall enlarge Japhet, all right, who are the original inhabitants of Europe, all right, the Japhetic people, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, all right, and Canaan should be his servant, all right, so he shall dwell in the tents of Shem. So remember, the Persian and the Medes came together, and the Medes go back to Japhet. So the sons of Japhet are, I think it should show you in the next one. It says the sons of, this is Cush. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, see, the sons of Japhet are Gomer and Magog and Mediah. Mediah, that's the Medes Empire. Those are the Medes, all right? Mediah. So that's the sons. So it says the sons of Japhet shall dwell in the tents of Shem, all right? So you see that with because remember, Elam, the Persians are Elam, go back to Elam. Elam are Shem, they're Shemites. The Persians are Shemites, all right? So just to kind of show you that. So when we go back to here, it says, in the third year of his reign, he made a feast unto all of his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, all right? Because Persia became the head out of the two when they came together. And Media basically lived under the powers of the Persian Empire, dwelt, as it says in the prophecy, the sons of Japhet shall dwell in the tents of Shem. Persia are Shemites. Medea are Japhites, all right? And they did dwell because the Persia became, it talks about two horns and one above the other in Daniel 7, and the one that's above the other is the Persian Empire. It says, the nobles and the prince of the provinces being before. It says, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, so this is going back to what we just read here in Daniel's chapter 11, verse 2, when it says, the fourth shall be richer than them all. It's talking about Xerxes, shall be richer than all of the kings that came before him. All right. That's why it says there, and when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty in many days, even 180 days, right? And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Shushan, the palace, both unto the great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver upon a pavement of red and blue and white and black and marble. Those were his palaces, right? If you could imagine, right? Beds that made out of gold and silver, linens of purple and silver rings and marble and so forth. And they gave them drink in vessels of gold. They were drinking out of vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse from one another, the royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. It's got to be the best of the best wine. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel. For so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. All right. And this is where it comes to the story about Queen Vashti when he sent for Vashti. We're not going to go into none of that, but you should know the story about Vashti. Queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. All right. So King Ahasuerus, as I said, is Xerxes the first. But let's have a quick look here. So Xerxes, this is him here.
Strong's H325. Ahashverosh.
Ahashverosh. All right. So it says, it means I will be silent and poor. All right. Well, he was richer than them all, right? Title of the king of Persia, probably Xerxes. And that's who it was, Xerxes the first. Yeah, see, this is what I was looking for here. So it says there, Ahasuerus, apparently the Hebrew form of the name Xerxes. That's why it says Ahasuerus in the Bible. All right. It's the Hebrew form of the name Xerxes. All right. So that's Xerxes the first. So let's go back to Daniel's 11. So now we've explained who those kings are, right? The 3 kings of Persia and the 4th king. We've just broke that down to you clearly who they are in verse 2. Now, verse 3, it says, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. All right. Now, that mighty king is Alexander the Great, the son of Philip of Macedonia. All right. He's known as the he-goat in the prophecies in Daniel chapter 8. Yeah, I think chapter 8, verse 5, and chapter 8, around verse 5. I believe that's it. All right. This is that mighty king. That's talking about this guy here. We're going to be here for a little while, like I said, so get your pens and pads out because we're going to break down the whole chapter today, Lord willing. This guy here, that mighty king is Alexander the Great, all right? Alexander the Third of Macedonia, all right? The most commonly known as Alexander the Great was the king of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedonia. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20 and spent most of his ruling years conducting a lengthy military campaign throughout Western Asia, Central Asia, and parts of South Asia and Egypt, right? And by the age of 30, he had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. He was undefeated in battle and is widely considered to be one of history's greatest and most successful military commanders. That's Alexander the Great. That's the mighty king in verse 3. All right. That's the same person that's spoken about in Daniel's chapter 8, which we're going to quickly bring it up for you. Daniel's chapter 8. He is the he-goat. This is him here. Daniel chapter 8, verse 5. This is that mighty king, right? And as I was considering, behold, as an he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes, right? That he-goat is Alexander the Great. And he came to the ram that had two horns. The ram is the Persian and the Mede Empire, all right, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power, all right? So he was the one that took down the Persian and the Mede Empire, Alexander the Great. He's the he-goat in Daniel's chapter 8. He's the mighty king in Daniel's 11, chapter 3. That's Alexander the Great. Let's go to the next verse. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, not according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. All right. So let's get that bit of history. It's Alexander. Who's in Alexander the Great? Hold on. His early life, childhood. Just go to his death. Son return. Where is it? Death and succession. Two soldiers. Let's even get to the part where it speaks about hold tight. So this is his death. So he says his kingdom. Let's start here. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the four winds of heaven. So the four winds of heaven, let's start there first, are the Diadoches, right? I just kind of want to bring it up on the screen first. So the word Diadochi means four, all right? And he's speaking about the four generals who took over Alexander's kingdom after he died, as we're going to see here, all right? As we're going to read here, sorry, should I say. It says here, it says, the Diadoches were the rival generals, families, and friends of Alexander the Great, who fought for control over his empire after his death in 323 BC. The wars of the Diadoches, all right, which are these four generals, marked the beginning of the Hellenistic period from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River's valley, all right? So the most notable Diadoches include Ptolemy, Antigonus, all right, who was a Macedonian Greek general, successor of Alexander the Great, all right? Cassander was another one, and Seleucus. Now, the two prominent ones that we're going to focus on in Daniel's 11 is going to be the Ptolemies, all right, who was the Macedonian Greek general, successor to Alexander the Great, who went on to found the Ptolemaic kingdom centered on Egypt, all right, which is the king of the south in Daniel's 11, which we're going to go into. And then the other major one we're going to focus on is the Seleucus Empire. All right, Seleucus the first dictator, who was another Macedonian Greek general, who was a successor of Alexander the Great's empire, who ruled, would have been Syria. He would have ruled what we know today as modern day Syria, basically. All right. So I was trying to see Seleucus, something I'm thinking of here. Successors. There was another bit of information. I want to see if I can quickly find it for you. Hopefully, it's there. Just hold tight a minute. Several injuries. Offense. Pause. Let's quickly find it, because the other part I'm looking to see if I can quickly find to you is when it speaks of this here. When it says, and not to his posterity, and not according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for the others beside those. So all of his posterity were killed. His wife, Alexander's wife, and his children. I was just quickly trying to find the information where it shows you that. Alexander the Great's wife and his children were all killed. All right. That's why it says his kingdom did not go to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. All right. Because all of his posterity was killed, his children. I'm just trying to quickly see if I can find where it shows me that. Post deaths, poisoning. Because what the generals did between them, they wiped out all of Alexander the Great's posterity, so that none of them could rule. This is how they was able to divide up Alexander the Great's kingdom between the four of them, because they killed all of his descendants, his children, his wife. Everyone was wiped out from Alexander the Great's family line, so that none of his kingdom could go to any of his posterity. All right. I'm just going to see if it actually says it here in Alexander's thing here during his death. No, it's not here. 1 second, family. Alexander. Hold on. So we killed. Yeah, okay. We can just quickly show you this bit here. So this is his posterity was wiped out, right? Alexander the Great, legitimate son Alexander the Fourth, and his mother Roxana were assassinated by Cassander, all right, which is one of those four generals, right? When it speaks about his kingdom splitting between the four winds. And one of Alexander's generals in 309 BCE, Cassander sought to eliminate potential rivals to his own power after Alexander's death, right? So it says, Livsas also mentions that Cassander had Alexander's illegitimate son, Heracles, killed after a deal with Polyperm. So all of his posterity was killed off. All of Alexander the Great. Building power, yeah. All of his posterity was wiped out. Alexander the Great's posterity. Civil war, death. Yeah, as it says, it even shows you here. Following the treaty, defenders of the Archid dynasty began to declare that Alexander IV should now exercise full power, and that a regent was no longer needed, since he had almost reached the significant age of 14, the age at which a Macedonian noble could become a court page. Cassandra's response was definitive. To secure his rule, in 309 BC, he commanded Glacius to secretly assassinate the 14-year-old Alexander IV and his mother. Right, the others were carried out. The orders, were carried out, and they were both poisoned. There is controversy about the exact year of Alexander IV's death because of conflicting sources, but the consensus of the Macedonian scholars and in the history of Macedonia, Volume 3, was that Alexander was killed late in the summer of 309 BC, shortly after his alleged half-brother Heracles. However, classical historians, Peter Green contends that Heracles was killed after Alexander IV was assassinated. All right. So all of his posterity was killed. So that was that prophecy fulfilled when it says the four winds are the four generals. That's why they were called the Diadoches. The Diadoches means four. And when it says, and not to his posterity, because his posterity were assassinated by some of those four generals, right? According to his dominion that he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked, and even for others beside those. And that's what happened. So that was the prophecy fulfilled regarding Alexander's posterity and the four generals, which are the four winds. These are the Diadoches, the four generals that we spoke about. That Alexander's kingdom was split between the Ptolemy, Antigonus, Cassandra, and Seleucus. All right, those are the four generals, which are the four winds in verse 4. Verse 5, it says, and the king of the south shall be strong. All right, the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. All right, so the divisions of Alexander's empire, the descendants of the Ptolemy I in Egypt, he is the king of the south, right? Ptolemy I in Egypt, that's the king of the south, right? That is speaking of here. And those of the Seleucus I in Syria, that's the king of the north. So these are the two main players that we're going to be speaking about, the two main empires or progenitors of these two empires that are going to be going to war. Now, these are referred to as the 6 Syrian Wars, right? In history, they call it the 6 Syrian Wars, right? And this is what the king of the south and the king of the north is all about, that we're going to go into with most of Daniel's chapter 11. So the king of the south here is Ptolemy the First of Egypt, all right? So the conflicts are an impact on Israel, all right? Because Israel sits in between Syria and Egypt. It's located directly between them. So the king of the north, Seleucus, became stronger, all right, than Ptolemy in what's going to take place. But this is what he's talking about here. The king of the south, that is Ptolemy the First of Egypt, all right? So let's go to the next verse. And we're going to go into the history and show you more of that. It says, in the end of years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement, all right? As empires normally do. For them to settle a war, they'll get the daughter of someone of that king to marry the son of the other king. So that way, that nullifies the grievances between the two empires or between the two kings, all right? So this is what takes place here. This is how it begins out anyway, in verse 6. It says, in the end of the years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north. All right. So remember, the king of the south is Ptolemy the First in Egypt, and the king of the north is the Seleucus the First, Nicator, all right, of Syria. All right. So it says, the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. Right, so that agreement is talking about marriage, right? But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So first thing we have to do here is identify the daughter, right? That shall come to the king of the north. So that daughter is what's her name? Bernice. All right. So now we've moved on several years now, right? In the Ptolemy and the Seleucid empires, where the rulers that are in power now are not Ptolemy the First or what's his name? It's not Ptolemy the First of Egypt. It's his son, right? Which is Ptolemy the Second, referred to as Ptolemy Philadelphus, all right? So it's his daughter that's going to marry Antiochus Epiphanes, which is the third king of Syria, all right? So it's not Seleucus the First that's in power now, or Ptolemy the First that's in power. It's Seleucus the Third or Antiochus the Third that's in power, which is the third king of Syria, and Ptolemy the Second that's in power in Egypt, right? So it's their sons that are in power now, all right? So the daughter, let's just quickly show you that. The daughter, this is her here. So the first part of the scripture, it says, and in the end of the years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. So that daughter is this young lady here, Bernice, Syria. That's who that's talking about. Bernice, also called Bernice Phernophorus or Bernice Syria, because she's the daughter of the king of the north, all right? Let's make sure I'm reading that right, because sometimes you get that confused. So let's go for the king's daughter of the south. Sorry, no, of the south. All right, sorry, because sometimes I do get that, right? She was an Egyptian princess and a Seleucid queen regent. She was a Seleucid queen by marriage to who? To Antiochus II Theosis. That's who I said, right? So Antiochus II Theosis was a Greek king of the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire who reigned from 260 to 246 BC. He succeeded his father, right, Antiochus I Sota, in the winter of 262-61 BC. He was the younger son of Antiochus I and Princess Straina and daughter of Demetrius, all right? So we've got here Don't want to confuse myself. So we've got the Seleucid Empire, which is the king of the north, and you've got the Ptolemy Empire, which is the king of the south. All right. So the prophecy says, for the king's daughter of the south, the king of, which would be Egypt, the Ptolemies, shall come to the king of the north, which is the Seleucid Empire, Syria, and she's going to marry him. So as you can see here, she was a Seleucid queen by marriage to Antiochus II and the regents during the minority of her son. See, here it is here. This is what I want to see. This is the information I was trying to find. Bernice was the daughter of Ptolemy II of Philadelphus, right? See, Ptolemy II of Philadelphus was the pharaoh of the Ptolemaic Egypt from 284 to 246 BC. He was the son of Ptolemy I, just like I said, the Macedonian Greek general of Alexander the Great, who founded the Ptolemaic kingdom after the death of Alexandra and Queen Bernice I, originally from Macedonia. So that's who she is. So that's Bernice. She's the daughter of Ptolemy II, all right, of Philadelphus, all right, and Arisona I of Egypt, all right. So she was named after her paternal grandmother, Bernice I of Egypt. The date of her birth is unknown. So it says, Bernice's serious relationship with her father remained positive after her mother's exile. When she moved upon her marriage, he provided her with bottled water from the Nile so she would never have to drink from any other source. So that's who that's talking about, Bernice. So, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. All right, so that's who that's talking about there. That's Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, of the king of the south, who married Antiochus Theos. All right. So this is what this is talking about here in verse 6. I hope that's clear. All right. That's who that's speaking about. So let's go to verse 7. It says, but out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army. All right. And shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, which is the Seleucid Empire, and shall deal against them and shall prevail. So the branch of her roots will come with an army against the king of the north. So the brother of Bernice, that's the branch of her roots, right? So he's a branch of her roots. Her roots goes back to Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, right? That's where her roots goes back to, right? He says, but out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. That's her brother, all right? It's talking about Bernice's brother, all right? The Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy II of Philadelphus, his son, what's his son's name? Ptolemy Energetus, I believe that's his name. Let's see if we can find him. All right, he's the one that shall come with an army. This is what that's talking about in verse 7 here, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, right? Antiochus' fortress, right? And shall deal against them and shall prevail. So the brother of Bernice, all right, let's make that clear. Ptolemy, I think it's Energetus, something like that. He's the successor of Ptolemy Philadelphus, right? His father. He invades and sacks Syria in revenge for the assassination of his sister Bernice, all right? That's why it says that she will not prevail. In verse 6, when it says she shall not prevail, when we was reading in verse 6, when it said, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. When it said there that, but she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, because she gets assassinated up there by the Seleucid Empire, by those people within the royal court. I think it was her husband that assassinated her. So it's her brother, Let's quickly find it. Because Bernice dies. Let me just quickly go back to that. Bernice. So this is Bernice, right? So this is Bernice. It says, at the branch of her roots is her brother. One shall stand in his estate, which is her brother, Ptolemy. All right. So let's just quickly see how she dies here. Does it show how she died? It's not showing. It's showing her death. Took up his fire funds. Yeah, here. Okay, let's quickly read this part here because maybe this gives a bit more information. Around 252 BC, following the peace agreement in 253 BC between Antiochus and Ptolemy to the end of the Second Syrian War, this is why it's called the Six Syrian Wars, all right? Bernice married the Seleucid monarch Antiochus II Theos, which we just established, right? Who divorced his wife Leodice I and transferred the succession to Bernice's children. Upon their marriage, she took the name Syria. That's why she's known as Bernice Syria, all right? Because she's now married to Antiochus II of the Syrian Empire. Referencing, it says it right here, referencing Syria. Bernice was fairly old for a Ptolemaic princess to marry. Her dowry was so large, she was known as Fernophorus, or the dower bringer. All right, so they paid a load of money to marry that old cow. Antiochus II took up again his first wife. So now he's gone back to his first wife, Antiochus II, right? Leodice, right? Ptolemy II, right, which is Ptolemy Philadelphus, pressured Antiochus II to return to Bernice, but he repeatedly delayed this. In 246 BC, when Ptolemy died, Ptolemy Philadelphus, Ptolemy III, good, I'm glad I got that right. Ptolemy III, as you can see here, is Euergetus, right? Was the third pharaoh of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. The Ptolemaic kingdom reached the height of its military and economic power during his kingship, as initiated by his father, Ptolemy II Philadelphus II, right? So Ptolemy III is Ptolemy Euergetus, increased the diplomatic pressure his father had begun on Antiochus II, right, the king of the north. Antiochus died shortly thereafter, many suspected from poisoning, possibly by Leodos, right? And then, let's see what it says there. Queen Bernice claimed the regency of her infant son at the third. Here you go. This is it here. Queen Bernice, all right, which is Ptolemy III's sister, Ptolemy II's daughter, claimed the regency for her infant son Antiochus III. Leodice imprisoned Bernice and kidnapped and murdered Antiochus III, which is her children, right? Bernice's children, placing her own son on the throne in a public confrontation with Antioch's chief magistrate, possibly about her son having been replaced with a lookalike. Leodice struck and killed Antiochus III. Bernice then pleaded with the assembled crowd for her son's life, not aware of his fate, gaining her sympathy from throughout the Seleucid cities. This sympathy marked her as a stronger foe and led her to execution, and led to her execution by Leodos. So Ptolemy III, right, here it goes. This is the point we're trying to find. Raised an army and rushed to Antioch in an attempt to save his sister Bernice's life, right? But arrived too late. Bernice's female attendants conspired, eventually along with her brother, to publish falsified letters proving that Bernice was a liar so that Ptolemy III could seize Bernice's dowry. Ptolemy III set about to avenge his sister's murder by invading Syria and having Leodice killed. So that's a fulfillment of verse 7. Let's go back to it. I'm glad all that information was in one place. So verse 7 here, when it says, but out of the branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. That's Ptolemy III, right? Which we just read about, the brother of Bernice, which shall come with an army, as we just read. He came with his army and invaded Syria because he wanted to avenge the death of his sister, all right? And he wanted to kill Leodice, who was responsible for killing Bernice and her children, all right? Which was the first wife of Antiochus II Theos, right? So, which shall come with an army, which is what he did, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, which is what he did, and shall deal against them and shall prevail, which is exactly what we read here. This is what he did. When it says here, Ptolemy III set about to avenge his sister's murder, invading Syria and having Leodoce killed. All right. So that's verse 7. So all of this takes place here. She was killed by Leodoce, who was Antiochus III's, Antiochus II, sorry, his first wife. And she was responsible for killing Antiochus II as well, because he was forced to return back to Bernice for marriage, basically in that. So she didn't want that to happen, Leodoce. So she killed her husband, and then she imprisoned Bernice, killed her son Antiochus III. And once Ptolemy III got wind of all of that, after his father died, he set out to avenge his sister's life by invading Syria, and he prevailed with that invasion. That's the Second Syrian War. I believe that because it says here, invading Syria. Yeah. So it says there, the Syrian wars were a series of 6 wars between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, right? And I believe this war here was the second of the 6 Syrian wars that took place under Ptolemy III. This guy here. All right. So that's verse 7. So, and he did prevail. Verse 8, it says, and he shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods, with their princesses, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. All right. So, and when it says, and he shall also carry captives, all right, into Egypt their gods with their princes, that's Ptolemy III, right? Eugatus, who we just read about, king of the south, carries captives and gold from Syria. The king of the north, Antiochus III, which was would have been Antiochus II at the time, but he was killed, and Antiochus III was in power, which Bernice put in power, was her lineage, not Bernice, sorry, Leodoce put in power. She, because it was her son, Antiochus III and kidnapped and murdered. So she killed Antiochus III, okay, placing her own son on the throne. So she killed Antiochus III and placed her own son on the throne, all right? Trying to see who her son was. Spouse. And so Seleucus II. So it would have been Seleucus II, who she put in power. So that's Leodosis, the wife of Antiochus II's son, because she had killed Antiochus III, Bernice's son, all right, who was Antiochus II's wife, all right. She had killed his son and imprisoned Bernice and killed Bernice, and she put her son in power, which is this guy here, Seleucus II Callicus Pogon, was a ruler of the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire, who reigned from 246 BC to 225 BC, faced with multiple enemies on various fronts and not always successful military. His reign was a time of great turmoil and fragmentation for the Seleucid Empire. So that's who she put in power, all right? So when we go back to, this is what it says there, and he shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods. This is what Ptolemy the third did, all right? Eugatus, with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, he shall continue more years than the king of the north. All right. So that's what he did. He carried them into captivity, right? That's talking about Ptolemy III. It says, so the king of the south, all right, shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. So that's once again still talking about, we're still in the time in the reign of Ptolemy III, Eugatus. He returns back home to Egypt, all right? While he was away fighting, he left his wife, Bernice II. We're not talking about his sister. This is his wife, because this is what they called him. They called, the men were called Ptolemies, the women were called Bernice, basically. It was like a title that they gave them as their names, right? So he married his wife Bernice II, in charge of the country, but swiftly returned when trouble erupted back home. All right, and this is talking about Ptolemy III Euergetes, all right, returns back to his kingdom, back to Egypt, all right? So that's who that's talking about there. He returns back to, where is it? Ptolemy the second, the third, yeah, this guy here. So verse 9, again, we're talking about the same Ptolemy, the brother of Bernice, all right, who went and sacked Syria, all right? Him, this guy here. He returns back home to Egypt because he was away fighting. As we showed you, he invaded Syria and he left his wife Bernice II in charge back in Egypt. He left her in charge, but there was like trouble back home. So he was forced to return back home, basically back to Egypt. All right. So kingdom, military, economic power during the kingdom of Ptolemy II. That was this. Son of Ptolemy II, first. Yeah, see, look, so it's only here. On his succession, Ptolemy III married Bernice II, all right, of Euergetes, all right, reigning queen of Cyrenaica, thereby bringing her territory into the Ptolemaic realm. So in the Third Syrian War, Ptolemy III invaded the Seleucid Empire and won a near total victory. So it was the Third Syrian War when he invaded Syria, not the Second Syrian War, what I said earlier. It was the Third Syrian War. That's a correction. I thought it was the Second Syrian War that he was involved in, Ptolemy III, right? Euergetes. It's the third one, it says there, the Third Syrian War. Ptolemy III invaded the Seleucid Empire and won a near total victory, but was forced to abandon the campaign as a result. Hey, look at that, it's beautiful. As a result of an uprising in Egypt. In the aftermath of this rebellion, Ptolemy forged a closer bond with the Egyptian priestly elite, which was codified in the Canopus Decree of 238 BC and set a trend for the Ptolemaic power in Egypt for the rest of the dynasty. All right, so this is here. It was the Third Syrian War, but he had to return back to Egypt because there was a rebellion, as you can see. Right, he forced to abandon the campaign as a result of an uprising in Egypt. All right, so that was the Third Syrian War. So this is what verse 9 is talking about when it says, "So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land." So he had to return to his own land after he was successful in the Third Syrian War because of the turmoil and the uprising that was going on back home. So that's Ptolemy III Euergetes, right? And it was the Third Syrian War that he was involved in against Seleucus II. All right. So let's go to the next verse. Let's go to Shalom to the Akiyams on the comment board. All praise and glory to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Shalom to you. So let's go to the next verse. Where are we? So, verse 10. It says, "But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble in multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress." So when it says here, "But his sons shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces," all right? So that's the son of Ptolemy III, all right? So it's talking about Ptolemy IV, Philopator, right? The son of Ptolemy III and of Bernice II. He was the fourth pharaoh of the Ptolemaic, or they say the Ptolemaic Empire of Egypt, right? From around 220 odd BC, roughly about 220 BC, right? He came into power. And that's when we kind of saw the decline of the Ptolemy dynasty began under the reign of Ptolemy IV. All right. So that's what it's talking about here. So here it says the son, "But his son shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress." So that is talking about, where is it gone? So his son is, he's talking about this guy here, Ptolemy the Fourth, Philometor. That's the son of Ptolemy the Third. All right. That's what verse 10 is talking about. And this particular son here, which says he shall be stirred up. Here you go, look. In ancient sources, Ptolemy IV was criticized for being more interested in luxury and court ceremony than government, politics, and foreign relations. The decline of the Ptolemaic dynasty is usually traced to his reign. All right. So that's what it's talking about. This is him. So verse 10 is talking about Ptolemy the Fourth. Let's go to verse 11. It says, and the king of the south shall be moved with choler, all right, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, all right. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. So the king of the south is Ptolemy Philopator, who we just looked at. He's going to gather his own army, and he's defeated by the king of the north, Antiochus the Great, right? I believe it's Antiochus the Great. So the king of the south, let me just see, is that who he was defeated by? His reign, the Fourth Syrian War. His session. Theodosius was forced to turn east. Poor, which had, yeah. So it's talking about, yeah. So it's talking about. So now we're going into the Fourth Syrian War here. So it says here, in 222 BC, Antiochus III, all right, which is the king of the north. So you got the king of the south shall be moved with choler and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, all right? So the king of the north is Antiochus. He assumes the Seleucid throne and instantly proved a dynamic leader determined to restore Seleucid power and to reverse the losses that the Seleucids had suffered in the Third Syrian War in 221 BC. This is at the same time that Ptolemy III, the fourth Philopator, came into power. 1 year after his accession, Antiochus III invaded the Ptolemaic territories in Colio, Syria. He was rebuffed by the Politaic governor of the region. Theodosius was forced to turn east as a result of the revolt of the satrap of the Medea Malon. So it says here, in spring 2019, Antiochus III tried again, attacking and capturing the key port city and hearth of the Seleucid dynasty, Seleucid Pera, which had been under Politaic control since 246 BC. Immediately after this, Theodosius, who had become unpopular at the Ptolemaic court, switched to the Seleucid side, bringing Syria and a large portion of the Ptolemaic fleet with him. Antiochus III received the surrender of Tyre and the Ptolemaious Ike, and he became bogged down in protracted sieges of Sidon and Doria. All right, so that's what that's talking about, the Fourth Syrian War. Grab a quick list of positions. Yeah, it says this. It says in mainland Greece, Ptolemy IV, was this Ptolemy Philopator, attempted to rebuild the Ptolemaic influence that had suffered a serious setback under the Ptolemy III as a result of the Cleomean War. In 2017 BC, Ptolemy's diplomats helped to broker a peace of Naupactus, which brought an end to the social war between Antigonoid Macedonian and the Anatolian League. He had much less success in his attempts to negotiate a peace between Macedonia and the Roman Empire in the First Macedonian War. So anyway, so that's what that's talking about there. That's what that's talking about here, all right? So let's go to verse 12. It says, and when he has taken away the multitude, right, his heart shall be lifted up, right? So that's talking about Ptolemy Philopator. All right. Pronouncing a lot of these words are not that easy, right? He shall defeat Antiochus the Great, but he shall not be strengthened by it. All right. So he says, and when he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands, but he shall not be strengthened by it. All right. So that would go down to, where is he again? That's Ptolemy Philopator, right? So we're looking at here now. Let me see. Egyptian revolt, Fourth Syrian War, quote. Is it here? I'm trying to quickly see it here. That's the revolt. Punic War. Because that's who he defeats against other enemies. States. We'll focus on. Because that's what it's called. That's when he defeated Antiochus. All right. The fourth king. For the king of the north shall return. Antiochus. Yeah, the great. Yep. So that's still regarding the fourth Syrian war, what we're reading here. And he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, because he defeated Antiochus III. All right, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands, but he shall not be strengthened by it. All right, so that is still talking about Ptolemy Philopator. All right, this guy here. And it says there, after the fourth Syrian war, Antiochus III quickly recovered his strength and led successful expeditions against other enemies. Probably as a result, Ptolemy IV, which is Ptolemy Philopator, interactions with other states all focus on maintaining peaceful relations and preventing warfare. And then it says there, in mainland Greece, I think we read that earlier, attempted to rebuild the Ptolemies but had suffered a serious setback under Ptolemy III as a result of the Cleomean Wars. The Romans, that was the revolt. Yep. So this is, so it's talking about Ptolemy IV Philopator. That's what it's talking about there in Daniel's chapter, in verse 11, verse 12, sorry, that we're in. Verse 11 and verse 12. It's still talking about Ptolemy Philopator here, all right? Because he was successful in some of his campaigns against the Seleucid Empire, so his heart was lifted up, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands, but he shall not be strengthened by it. And that even goes into the revolt that was going on within, because there was a revolt going on within his own territory, foreign affair. Yeah. Because there was a revolt going on. You see here? It says Egyptian revolt and death. Sometimes after the end of the fourth Syrian war, revolts broke out in Egypt itself. Fighting took place in the north of the country in the Delta, and separately in Upper Egypt, where fighting led to the interruption of building work on the temple of Horus at Edfu. Right? The reasons for these revolts are unclear. The Hellenistic historian Polybius argued that they were a natural result of Ptolemy IV's decision, as you can see, right, to arm the Egyptians during the fourth Syrian war. All right. It says there, Gutner Holber argues that the fact that the rebels attacked Egyptian temples suggests that it was a rebellion of the lower classes inspired by social injustice that had been exacerbated by the heavy taxation necessary to fund that war. So it says in October or November 205 BC, the leader of the southern revolt captured the city of Thebes and had himself crowned pharaoh, taking the name Horwenefer, rendered in Greek sources as Hagoronophor. Despite Ptolemaic efforts to suppress his regime, Horarepha would retain his independence for nearly 20 years until finally captured in August 186 BC. It says the revolt meant that the Ptolemaic forces were unable to defend southern Egypt from Nubia incursions, right? And this goes into a bit more of the history. And that's when he died. In the midst of the conflict in August 204 BC, Ptolemy IV died in unclear circumstances, all right? 25th, who had been a co-regent, took over. Okay. So that's what that's talking about there anyway. When we go back to Daniel's 12, he was taken away by the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands in the revolt that took place in Egypt, but he shall not be strengthened by it, all right? Because he eventually died anyway during those revolts. And his son took over. His son was very young because he died under unclear circumstances, as it said in 24 BC, and he was under the influence of his mistress, basically before his own death, Ptolemy IV Philopator. So that's what that's talking about there. Verse 12. Verse 13. For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches, right? So the king of the north shall return. So that's Antiochus III, the Great. He shall return with a great army and money into Egypt. That's Antiochus III, the Great. And shall certainly come after certain years with a great army with much riches, all right? So that's this guy here. Let's see if we can quickly find Antiochus the Great. Where are you? He's from the Seleucid side. So we've got Antiochus III. And his successor was Philopator. Here he is. Antiochus III. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. So that's Antiochus III, the Great. That's this dude here. So this is what we're talking about now. All right. Antiochus III, the Great, was the sixth ruler of the Seleucid Empire. He ruled over the region of Syria and large parts of the West Asia, right? So this is the guy we're talking about here, Antiochus the Great. So for the king of the north, which is Antiochus the Great now, is in power. He's the king that's in power now, right? Shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches, all right? So that's this guy here. Let's just quickly go early wars. All right, so this is what we was talking about earlier, all right? So the campaigns of 219 BC and 218 BC carried the Seleucid armies, right, almost to the confines of the Ptolemaic kingdom. But in 217 BC, Ptolemy IV, which is Ptolemy Philopator, defeated Antiochus at the Battle of Rafina, all right? So when we was reading in verse 12, when it says he had taken away the multitude, his heart was lifted up because he had defeated Antiochus the Great in the Battle of Rafina, right? In verse 12, when we was reading in verse 12 about Philopator, let me just quickly go back there, so I'll quickly show you. So when we was reading in verse 12, when it says that his heart, and when he had taken away the multitude, and his heart shall be lifted up, because he defeated Antiochus the Great in the Battle of Rafina. That's Ptolemy Philopator, right? And he shall cast down many tens of thousands, but he shall not be strengthened by it, all right? And also when he returned back home, he had the rebellion in Egypt with his own people that had rebelled against his rulership. But that's why his heart was lifted up, because he defeated Antiochus. He defeated Antiochus the Great in the battle. All right. And then it says this defeat nullified all Antiochus' successors and compelled him to withdraw north of Lebanon. And in 216 BC, his army marched into western Anatolia to suppress the local rebellion by Antiochus' own cousin Archaeus, and had by 214 BC driven him from the fields of Sardis. All right. And then it says, so we get back to it, says here, capturing, government had performed tolerant the north, and then he comes back. So we'll see where he comes back for the Ptolemies. Here it is here. Right. So when we was reading now in verse 13, when it says that the king of the north shall return, that's Antiochus the Great returning, because he had been defeated by Ptolemy the fourth Philopator in the Battle of Rafina, all right, several years earlier. So when we're reading here now in verse 13, it says, for the king of the north shall return. So that's Antiochus the Great returning now to this battle against the Ptolemaic Empire, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years. He comes back after certain years, after the defeat he had several years earlier, with a great army and with much riches. So we go back to, this is it here. We can kind of start. Okay, let's start from here. It says, from the Seleucia on the Tigris, he led a short expedition down the Persian Gulf, right, against the Gerhanians of the Arabian coast in 205 to 24 BC. Antiochus seemed to have restored, you see, the Seleucid Empire in the east, which earned him the title of the Great. So that's where he gets the name from, Antiochus the Great, right? Which is Antiochus Magus, which means Antiochus the Great. That's how he got that name, right? Because now his army were much more drilled and much more battle hardened and successful in their wars now. In 205 BC, the infant Ptolemy the fourth Epiphanes, that's the son of Ptolemy the fourth Philopator. So the infant Ptolemy the fifth Epiphanes succeeded to the Egyptian throne, right? Because he was a young boy, about 6 or 8 years old when he succeeded to the throne, right? And Antiochus is said, notably by Polybius, who's a historian, to have concluded a secret pact with Philip V of Macedonia for the partition of the Ptolemaic possessions. Under the terms of the pact, Macedonia was to receive the Ptolemaic possessions around the Aegean Sea and Syria, while Antiochus would annex Cyrus and Egypt. Once more, Antiochus attacked the Ptolemaic province of Colo-Syria and Phoenicia, and by 199 BC, seems to have had possession of it before the Anatolian leader Scopus recovered it for Ptolemy. But that recovery proved brief, for in 198 BC, Antiochus defeated Scopus at the Battle of Paneum near the sources of the Jordan, a battle which marks the end of the Ptolemaic rule in Judea. Because remember, Israel sits in between all of that, between Syria and Egypt. We're in the middle. So, there was always fighting for the rulership over the promised land, right, and over our people, basically, and to have one have one of the two rulers, whether it's the king of the north or the king of the south, to be subjugated by the other. So it was always for that power over Israel, and to have one of the two kings of the king of the north, the king of the south. The Seleucids wanted the Ptolemies under their rulership, to be a tribute to them, while the Ptolemies wanted the Seleucid Empire to be a tribute, to be like a vassal state to them. And at the same time, they was always fighting over Jerusalem, Judea, Israel, because that sat in the middle of the two kings' territory, and that basically, all right. So that's what that verse is talking about here. The king of the north returns. That's Antiochus the Great, and shall set forth a multitude and greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And that's exactly what we saw there, what Antiochus did, basically. All right. So verse 14, it says, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. All right. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish division, but they shall fall. So the king of the south of the Seleucid Empire shall do battle with the king of the north, Antiochus the Great. The robbers of thy people, Seleucus at that time, he controls Israel now, right? So he's the robbers of the Lord's people, which is the king of the north, all right, under Antiochus the Great. That's why it says Also the robbers of thy people, of the Lord's people, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So this is kind of, we're going to come into the times of the Maccabees, all right, just to make you understand. But Antiochus the Great is the robbers of our people. It starts with him, right, with Antiochus the Great, because now he controls, I believe he takes control of Judea. What does it say here? Okay, start. Okay, yeah, it's because it's his son is the wicked one, Antiochus Epiphanes. So, okay, so he was a bit more kind towards us, but he ruled over us. But this is where it starts, basically. But the son, I always remember that the son Epiphanes is the wicked is the wicked one. So this is where it kind of starts. Antiochus and the Jews, right? Antiochus III resettled 2,000 Israelite families from Babylonia into Hellenistic Anatolia, regions of Lydia and Phrygia. Josephus portrays him as friendly towards the Jews of Jerusalem and cognizant of their loyalty to him, right? So it says, in stark contrast to the attitude of his son, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, right? Now this is where this is all going to lead into. We're going to go from Antiochus the Great, which is the third, into the rulership of Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes. That's the wicked one, right? And it says, in stark contrast to the attitude of his son, in fact, Antiochus III lowered taxes for the Israelites, granted subventions to the temple, and let the Jews live, as Josephus puts it, according to the law of their forefathers, all right? So he wasn't pushing these heathen laws on us. It was his son that does that, and we're going to get into that as part of Daniel chapter 11. So Antiochus III was more was more accepting of the Israelites, even though we was a vassal state to them and they ruled over us. He allowed us to to keep our high holy days, our practices. He lowered our taxes and so forth and so on. This is what it says here, and this is when we're going to come into the reigns of the Maccabees. Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, is mentioned in the Deuteronomic books of Maccabees. The subject of Maccabees in the Maccabean revolt against Antiochus' son, Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, all right? Epiphanes, all right? Which we're going to go into that as part of this today's lesson, all right? So let's go back to. So they are the robbers of our people, which are the Seleucid Empire, which took control over us. So it starts under Antiochus III, but he was more kind towards the Israelites than his son, Antiochus Epiphanes, as we're going to see as we go through, all right? And as it says, as Josephus said himself. Verse 15, it says, so the king of the north, all right, shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So King Antiochus III, all right, the Great, he returns with a larger army, all right. Once more, Antiochus attacks the Ptolemaic province of Colossyria, which is what we read earlier, right, and Phoenicia, and by like 199 BC seems to have possession of it before the Anatolian leader Scopas recovered it from Ptolemy. So we read all that earlier, right? So that's kind of going into that, as still going into that. The king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people. Now, so we read that earlier, right? When it said he attacked the Ptolemaic province of Colossyria and Phoenicia in 199 BC, and he had taken possession of it before the Anatolian leader Scopas recovered it for Ptolemy, right? But that recovery proved brief, right? For in 198 BC, Antiochus defeated Scopas at the Battle of Paneum, which is what we read out earlier, near the sources of Jordan, a battle which marks the end of the Ptolemaic rule in Judea. Hence, as we showed you now, the Seleucid Empire has control over Judea, all right? So this is what this is talking about here, still talking about those same events taking place that we read about earlier. Verse 16, it says, but he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, all right? And none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land. So we should know what the glorious land is by now, right? Which by his hand shall be consumed. So the glorious land is Israel, the promised land, Judea, which sits in between these two empires, right? Between these two kings, the king of the south, the king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, and the Ptolemaic Empire. So the glorious land is talking about the promised land, Israel, right, which was repeatedly overrun and devastated by the Seleucus and Antiochus army in their ongoing wars, because they have to cut through Israel to come to Egypt, the Seleucid Empire under, the Antiochus, whether it was Antiochus III or Antiochus IV, doesn't matter which one. The Seleucid Empire and their armies had to cut through Israel to make their way to Egypt. Same forth. The Ptolemaic armies under the Ptolemies had to come through Israel, the promised land, that glorious land, when they're going to war against Syria, when they're going to go up into Syria to fight against the Seleucid Empire. So we sat in the middle of all of that. So the promised land sits in the middle of all of these wars, the 6 Syrian wars that's going on, and them fighting over Judea and the promised land. We sat in the middle of that, of the two nations, the two kings, the two empires, and at the same time, they was also fighting over, take control of who's going to be controlling Israel at that time. So the glorious land is Israel, the promised land, right? In verse 16, which gets consumed because of that, because it gets devastated and overrun by, if you can think, the amount of times these armies are coming through to fight each other, and then they're also stopping off in Israel, taking whatever resources they need for their armies to bring with them to fight the wars or whatever, because we didn't have that, we didn't wield that power at that time. The power during that time was wielded between the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires. All right. Verse 17 says, "He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom," right? And upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. Right. So the strength of his kingdoms, right? That's the Antiochus's armies, all right? It says, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom. Right, that's Antiochus and his armies. Right, the daughter of women was the first. What do they call her again? What do they call that queen again? Cleopatra. So the daughter of women was the first Cleopatra, because Cleopatra is a title, right? That just like Bernice was a title for the Ptolemaic daughters, women that were daughters and princesses or queens. Bernice was the title, right, as used basically, and Cleopatra was a title used in the Seleucid Empire. So the first Cleopatra is the daughter of Antiochus the Great, which is Antiochus III, and he gave her up to marry what's his name, Ptolemy V, Epiphanes, right? So when it says here, "Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women," right? That's Antiochus the Great's daughter, Cleopatra, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. All right. So when it says, "But she shall not stand on his side, and neither be for him," Cleopatra sides with her husband, Ptolemy Epiphanes, against her father, basically. So in her father's eyes, she's been corrupted by him. All right, this is what it says there. "And he shall give him the daughter of women." He gives Antiochus III the Great, gives his daughter up, because this is all part of like a peace pact that you make. I said earlier, your daughter marries their son, or their son marries your daughter, so the two kingdoms are not at war. That's the peace pact, by having your children marry their children. So he gives up his daughter, which is Cleopatra the first, and that's why they say she's a daughter of women, because all the princesses after her were all named Cleopatra, right? Corrupting her. So her husband is what's his name? Ptolemy V, the son of Ptolemy IV, obviously. Epiphanes, his name is, right? "But she shall not stand on his side," because she sides with her husband, right? "Neither be for him." So that's why it says corrupting her. So to her father, she's been corrupted by her husband, right? But you should know that once his daughter married someone, the husband is she should be in sync with her husband. That's why it says the twain shall become one. So this is, let's just quickly get her up. Here's Cleopatra the First. Let's go back to Antiochus the Great. Let's see if we can get his children. Right, 1 second. Oh, I need to drink some water. Yeah, this is going to be a long one. Daniel's 11 is not an easy one to go through, and we need to do the whole chapter today. So, as I said, boy, you got to be patient if you want to get this full breakdown regarding Daniel chapter 11. So, Antiochus 11, I'm about to say 11, Antiochus the third. So his daughter is, where's his children? Issues, Leodosius, mother, issues, names. Does it show his daughter here? Father, mother. It's not showing his children. Let's go to family. So it says on the family. Fair. Okay. Look at that. So Cleopatra the First, Thea Epiphanes, Syria, well known as Cleopatra the First or Cleopatra Syria, was a princess of the Seleucid Empire, queen of the Ptolemaic Egypt by marriage to, see that? Ptolemy V of Egypt from 193 BC and regent of the Queen of Egypt during the minority of their son Ptolemy VI, right, from her husband's death. So she's married to, see, Ptolemy V, right, Epiphanes. Eucharitus was the king of the Ptolemaic Egypt from July 204 BC to 180 BC. So she marries, she's the, it should show me who, so quickly see. It shows me who her father is here. Yes, see, okay, there it is. Her father is Antiochus III. See, it says there, father Antiochus III. So that's her father, all right? So, here you go. Look at that. It's beautiful. Exactly what I wanted. So, in 197 BC, Antiochus III had captured a number of cities in Asia Minor, previously under the control of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. The Romans supported the Egyptians' interests when they negotiated with the Seleucid king in Lysimania in 196 BC. In response, Antiochus III indicated his willingness to make peace with Ptolemy V, right? And to have his daughter Cleopatra I marry Ptolemy V. They were betrothed in 195 BC and their marriage took place in 193 BC in Raphia. At that time, Ptolemy V was about 16 years old and Cleopatra I, there you go, for you. Don't let the IUIC see this. They'll lose their mind. Seriously. It says, at that time, Ptolemy V was about 16 years old and Cleopatra I was about what? See that? 10 years old. Cleopatra I. Come on, tell you how I see this, boy, they lose their mind. Later on, Egypt's Ptolemaic kings were to argue that Cleopatra I had received Syria as a dowry and therefore his territory again belonged to Egypt. It is not clear if this was the case. However, in practice, Syria remained a Seleucid possession after the Battle of Panea. Father of the cult, she honored her husband. So this is it. In Alexandria, Cleopatra I, all right, was referred to as the Syrian. As part of the Ptolemaic cult, she was honored with her husband as Thea Epiphanes, in line with ancient Egyptian tradition of siblings marriage. She was also named sister of Ptolemy V, a synod of priests held by the Memphis in 185 BC, and granted Cleopatra all the honors that had been given to Ptolemy V in 196 BC. And she became the regent queen. Yeah, so she decided because he died unexpectedly in September, and at the age of only 30, Cleopatra's son Ptolemy VI was only 6 years old and was immediately crowned king, and Cleopatra his regent. She was the first Ptolemaic queen to rule without her husband. In documents from this period, Cleopatra is named Thea Epiphanes, and her name appears before Ptolemy's. Coins were minted under the joint authority of her and her son. Trying. Oh, she was good. Okay. So let's go back to that. So she was fully on her husband's side, especially after he died as well. So when we go back to here, this is what it's talking about here. When it says, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, right? Antiochus III, the Great, which is Antiochus the Great, an upright one with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women. That's what he did. His daughter Cleopatra the first, as she was the first Cleopatra. That's why she's referred to as the daughter of women, corrupting her, right? Because she sided with the husband, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him, because she sided with her husband in many things. I'm just trying to think if it shows you here. Under the war preparations. Ptolemy the fifth. Let me just see if it shows you. Early life, regencies. The Fifth Syrian War. But that's what that's talking about, basically. She sided with her husband in everything. Says, who's telling me? Him to do his own daughter, Cleopatra the first. Okay, we read that. Great defeat. Yeah, I can't actually find it, but that's what that's talking about. She sided with her husband in everything to do with against her own father. So things that her father maybe wanted her to do against her husband, she weren't having none of it. She sided with her husband in everything. She became he's confident. He's confident. What they call it? He's confident, like he's, you know, like he's there's a word that they use it now. I forget what the mafia have a word for it as well that they use when they have that person that's, you know, advising the godfather what to do when the godfather speaks about certain things. But I forget what the word that they use now. But that's what she did anyway. All right, and that's what that's talking about there. Verse 17. Verse 18. It says, after this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. All right. So after this shall he turn his face unto his isles. The isles represent the coastal towns of the Ptolemy Empire. Right. That's what that's talking about. All right. The isles of the Ptolemy Empire. All right. And shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. All right. So it says the prince is what's his name? Scipio Asiaticus. All right. When it says here, but a prince, when it says, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. All right. So that's talking about, because I believe that they went to Scipio Asiaticus is a Roman, leader of a Roman army in Asia Minor, right? They defeated the large naval forces brought against him by Antiochus the Great. So the Ptolemy had like a finger what they call it, like a bond, like an agreement with the Romans. So the leader of the Roman army, Scipio Asiaticus, in Asia Minor, he defeated the large naval forces brought against him by Antiochus the Great, right? And that's what he did. I think that's in First Maccabees. Let's get another. Hold on. I think it speaks about it in First Maccabees. 1 second. First Maccabees. First Maccabees, I want. Chapter 8. Let's see what's there. Yeah, there it is. First Maccabees. here. It says, how also Antiochus the Great, king of Asia, that came against them in battle, right, having 120 elephants with horsemen and chariots and a very great army, was discomfited by them, and how they took him alive and covenanted that he and such as reigned after him should pay a great tribute and give hostages that which was agreed upon, right? And the country of India and Media and Lydia, and of the goodliest countries which they took of him and gave to King Eumenes, all right? So we go back to here. It speaks about, is it King? Yeah, Scipio Asiaticus, I'm thinking of, yeah. He shall take many, but a prince of his own shall be hurt. Yep, so that prince is the Roman general, Scipio Asiaticus. Sees, yep. And without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon himself. So that prince is talking about Scipio. Scipio, so I can keep finding. Asiaticus. That's Alexandra. That's Ptolemy's, the Diadoches, Alexandra. Let's see what I could find it. Scipio, I'm sure that's his name. Scipio. P-O-A-S. Yeah, that's the Roman general I'm thinking of. He elected 191 BC. So I'll see if it shows you his things, councils, political fool. It's not really showing you, but this is the guy here. Scipio, Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus. All right. This is the guy here that we're speaking of. So let's see if it shows Second Punic War. 190 BC of the Gaius Latius. Ah, look at that, beautiful. All praises to Yahweh Shem Yahushua Bashem Rakakadas. This is what I'm looking for. See it there? It says here, he was finally elected councillor in 190 BC, with his co-counsel being his brother, old second in command, Gaius Laius. According to Smith, the Senate had not much confidence in his abilities, and it was only through the offer of his brother Africanus to accompany him as a legate that he obtained the province of Greece and the conduct of the war against Antiochus. So the Roman Seleucid War, also called the Anatolian War, Antiochian War, the Syrian War, and Syrian-Anatolian War, was a military conflict between two coalitions, right? One led by the Roman Republic, and the other led by, there it is, Seleucus the king, Antiochus III, which is Antiochus III of, let's bring it up here, I don't mind doing that, of, which is Antiochus the Great, sorry. That's who that is. Antiochus III is Antiochus the Great, as you can see here, right? So it was him. The fighting took place in modern-day southern mainland Greece and the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor. The war was a consequence of a Cold War between both powers, which started in 196 BC. In this period, the Romans and the Seleucids attempted to settle spheres of influence by forging alliances with the small Greek city-states. Also important were the Romans and the Seleucids' irreconcilable visions of the Aegean, right? The Romans saw Greece as the sphere of influence and Asia Minor as a buffer area, while the Seleucids saw Asia Minor as a core part of their empire, with Greece as the buffer zone. All right, so that's what that's talking about here. See, look, beautiful. Antiochus's naval forces in the Aegean were defeated in two major engagements, which saw the Roman coalition gain naval superiority. The Council of 190 BC, Lucius Cornelius Scipio, which is Lucius Cornelius Scipio, is Scipio Asiaticus, who we're speaking about, right, was a general or statesman in the Roman Republic. then pursued Antiochus, which is Antiochus the Great, into Asia Minor with the support of the Pergami king Epiphanes II. All right. So this is what verse 18 is speaking about when it says, "But the prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease," right? "Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him." All right. So that prince is Scipio Asiaticus, who we're reading about here. Lucius Cornelius Scipio. So they pursued, see it says there, then, it says there, the council, right? Then pursued Antiochus into Asia Minor with the support of who? The Pergami king Epiphanes II. This is why I went to this here. I knew there was a reason why I went to there. He played a part in it. This is why I was reading here in First Maccabees chapter 8 verse 6. It says it's talking about this. This is talking about the same war that we're just reading about there with the Romans. It says how also Antiochus the great king of Asia that came against them in battle, having 120 elephants, right, with horsemen and chariots, and a very great army was discomfited by them, and they took him alive and convented that he and such as reigned after him should pay a great tribute and give hostages that which was agreed upon. And the country of India and Medea and Lydia and the goodliness countries which they took of him and gave to who? King Epiphanes, because he assisted the Romans in that war against Antiochus the Great, King Epiphanes. So that's what he was given. He was given countries out of India, Medea, and Lydia, right? The goodness of those countries that they took of him was given to King Epiphanes, all right? As you can see here, it says here, now, the first verse says, now Judas had heard of the Romans, and they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all that joined themselves unto them, and make a league of amity with all that came unto them. Now, understand this. This ain't talking about the Edomite Romans. These are talking about the descendants of the Etruscans, right? These are the sons and daughters of Japhet that at this time were the main people in the Roman Empire. These are the Etruscans who are now calling themselves Romans, right? The sons and daughters of Japhet. This is not the time when the Romans Empire became known as the Edomites. Just so you understand, because this is happening around 190 BC, all right? Around 100 odd years before the Roman Empire became known as the Edomite Empire, all right? So that's what that's talking about there. Yeah. So let's go back to Daniel's chapter 11. So that's verse 18. Let's go to the next verse. Verse 19. It says, then he shall turn his face towards the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. All right? That's verse 19. So on his way home to Syria, all right, Antiochus the Great started a fresh campaign pillaging temples in a place called Elamias, where he died. I think that goes back to, I think that's where he died. Where did he die? Where did Antiochus the Great die? That's Ptolemy. That's the 5th. Let's quickly see. Antiochus, because he was pillaging temples on his way back. Antiochus the 3rd. Let's quickly go to his death. War and campaigns. War against Rome. Look at that. I haven't even got it here. See? There's even more information about that. War against Roman Empire. See? Talks about it again. The Treaty of Apennine. Antiochus abandoned all the country north and west of Tamaris, most of which the Roman Republic gave either to the Rose or to the Attilian ruler, Epiphanes II. So even this, I could have even gone into here to show you all of that, the war against the Romans and his death. So after that, he died, all right? As we're going to see here. I'll see what says he died in. Greece, army, Marcus, Capelia. Then forcing them to withdraw to Asia Minor. The decisive battle was by, there you go, Scipio Asiaticus. That was the decisive battle that defeated him. which we read earlier. Abandoned country of north. Let's see where it shows that he died. Oh, it is here. It says Antiochus mounted a fresh eastern expedition in Luristan, where he was killed while pillaging a temple of Bel at Elamias, Persia in 187 BC. So that's what verse 19 is talking about. It says, then he shall turn his face towards the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Right? So this is what he did. He turned his fort of his own land, just like it says here. Where was I reading from here? Because his blood just bad. Yeah, is it here? As a consequence of his blow to the Seleucid power, the outlying provinces of the empire recovered by Antiochus reasserted their independence, right? So Antiochus mounted a fresh eastern expedition in Luristan, just like what it says in the scriptures, where he was killed while pillaging a temple of Bel and Elamias. So the provinces that he had taken back control of in his own empire that was recovered by Antiochus, they reasserted, after his defeat by the Romans, right? They reasserted their independence. So Antiochus mounted a fresh eastern expedition against those same provinces within the Seleucid Empire, and that's where he was finally killed while he was pillaging the temple of Bel in Elamias. So this is why it says here in verse 19, when it says, then shall he turn his face towards the fort of his own land, because those provinces within his own land, they reasserted their own power because of his defeat by the Romans. So he turned back his face towards his own empire, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. And that's when he died. He died what? Pillaging the in Bel, that temple in Bel, right? In Elamias, the temple of Bel in Elamias. That's how he died, Antiochus the Great. So this is what verse 19 is talking about. Prophecy is beautiful, man, I'm telling you. Verse 20 says, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes. Whoa. In the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Now that, I believe, is talking about Seleucus Philopator the Fourth, who raises taxes to pay the Romans tribute. That is who that's talking about. He raises taxes to pay the Romans tribute. So that's Seleucus Philopator the Fourth, which is, does it have it here? Is there? This guy here. Yeah. This is the guy that raised up in his place. Birth and family. We'll just quickly read it. He was the second son and the successor of who? Antiochus III the Great. Right? This is what we're talking about here. Seleucus the Fourth Philopator. Right? So he was the second son and successor to Antiochus III the Great and Leodosia III. He was made heir to his father after the death of his elder brother Antiochus the king. Seleucus IV wed his sister Leodosia IV, by whom he had three children, two sons, Demetrius the first and Antiochus, and a daughter Leodosia the fifth. So that's what that's talking about. And then he had a conflict with Rome. This is Seleucus was put in charge to reestablish the colony of Lysimachia by his father. Upon the outbreak of war, Seleucus commanded his own forces unsuccessfully besieging Pergamon and taking the city of Phoenicia before the fighting in the Battle of Magnesia alongside his father. After their defeat at Magnesia, Seleucus was made co-regent in 189 BC, and Seleucus signed the Treaty of Apima with Rome in 188 BC, and as part of that treaty, Seleucus oversaw the supply of grains and scouts to Romans and Pergamene forces during the campaign against the Galatians. So he became a tributary to the Romans, right? Yeah. So in order for him to do that, he got to raise taxes. He's got to find money and food to provide to the Romans, and that's what he had to do. His reign, and then his death. Yeah, okay, that's fine. We don't need to go more into that one. So that's who that's talking about there. Then shall he stand up in his state and a raise of taxes? That's Seleucus, the fourth Philopator, in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Let's see how he died. On September 3rd, Seleucus was assassinated by Helidorus, one of his leading bureaucrats. The ancient sources do not record a motive for this act. Possibly it was simple lust of power, or possibly the sources of misattributed the death to one who gained the most from it. Helidorus took over as regent, ruling on behalf of Seleucus IV, his young child Antiochus. Helidorus' reign as regent was brief. However, a month later he was replaced by Antiochus IV with support from Pergamon. So he was eventually assassinated. How long did he rule for? How long did he rule for? Oh, right, 187 BC to 175. So roughly 12 years he ruled for. So that's who that's talking about there. He was destroyed neither in anger nor in battle because he was assassinated. He was assassinated quietly in the middle of the night somewhere, as they did back then, boy. Either poisoned or something that they did to him. Verse 21. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. All right. Whoa. Who should all know that is by now? That's Antiochus Epiphanes. All right. To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. That's Antiochus Epiphanes. So now we've gone on to the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes. So after this guy died, his reign, as it says here, after he died, he renewed the alliance. That's his reign. His death. Yeah. Young son, child Antiochus. And let's see, because I don't think he stayed much longer neither. Successor. Look quickly find. This is Antiochus IV. There's this guy here. He reigned from 175 to 170 BC. All right. And then we've got, this is what it's talking about, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. He's the king of the Seleucid Empire. So he's the son of King Antiochus III. Antiochus IV's accession to the throne was controversial. Yeah, because he was an usurper, that's right. As he was seen as a usurper by some. After the death of his brother, all right, who we were just speaking about, Seleucus IV Philopator in 175 BC, the true heir should have been Seleucus' son, Demetrius I. However, Demetrius I was very young and a hostage in Rome at the time, and Antiochus seized the opportunity to declare himself king instead, successfully rallying enough of the Greek ruling class in Antioch to support his claim. This helped set a destabilizing trend in the Seleucid Empire in subsequent generations as an increasing number of claimants tried to usurp the throne. After his own death, power struggles between compelling lines of the ruling dynasty heavily contributed to the collapse of the empire. Antiochus' often eccentric behavior and capricious actions led some of his contemporaries to call him Epiphanes, which means what? The mad. Because he was a nutcase. That's the one that rained terror on the Israelites, was Antiochus Epiphanes. So this is the man that's in power now. So now we're in verse 21. This is the man that's in power. Antiochus, this is the vile person, right? So when it says here, he's the second son of Antiochus the Great, and he was indeed one of the most morally degraded men, all right? So this is, I believe, when you go into First Maccabees, is it him? First Maccabees chapter 1. Hold on, let me just see. Let's see the wickedness of pride. Yes. So this is this guy here. This is where he comes into play here. It says here, this is First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, which means the mad. This was the crazy one. Son of Antiochus the king, which is Antiochus the Great, who had been an hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 130th and 70th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded men, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this is the madman, Antiochus Epiphanes, which means Antiochus the mad. This is the guy that's in charge now, all right? So when we go back to, where was we? This is this guy here. He's in charge now. And like I said, he usurped the throne from, he's an usurper to the throne after his brother died, because it was meant to go to his brother's son. As always, you know, the brother dies, then if he's got any children, the children should become the heirs now. But he took control of all of that, all right? Because the son, the heir, was in Rome as a hostage, as they do to keep the peace. Because those are other things they did back then. As well as marriage, they would say to the king or to the queen at the time of a province, you know, of a country that they're controlling, the Romans, they would say, okay, you're going to give us your son and your daughter. We're going to raise them. So that way you won't make any attempt to make any war against us or any of our provinces, because we've got your son and your daughter under our, you know, under our tutorship. They're living with us. They're living under the Roman Empire, basically in that. So they would have to give up their sons and daughters. So that's what Seleucus Philippe had to do. His son Demetrius I was being raised under the Roman rulership, and that's what would help keep the peace between them and the Romans. But after he died, his brother, the other son of Antiochus the Great, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, took control, as it says here. His contemporaries called him Epiphanes, which means the mad, because this was the crazy man, and that's why it says in First Maccabees, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus surnamed Epiphanes, right? The mad, the son of Antiochus the king. So that's what that's talking about in verse 21. He's come into power. And in verse 22, it says, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant, all right? So verse 22 is talking about he goes in and conquers Egypt and captures, what's his name? The Ptolemies. Even though he had a covenant with the Ptolemy Empire, he went in and he conquered them. And that's Antiochus Epiphanes does that. That's part of his rise to power. See what we do. Mind return. Yeah. Yeah, because he goes in to war against Egypt. I mean, there's a lot. This is it here. I'm not going to read it, because there's a lot of reading in to go down to 11, right? But this is here. The wars against Egypt and relations with Rome. And that's what he did, right? And that's where we're coming into the 6th Syrian war. So he goes in against Egypt and he captures the king of Egypt at the time, Ptolemy. Because they were demanding, this is it, the guardians of Ptolemy, the fourth Philometor, demanded the return of Syria in 170 BC, declaring war on the Seleucids on the assumption that the kingdom was divided after Antiochus' murder of his nephew, right, which was his brother's son, Demetrius I, right? It says, however, Antiochus had warnings of the attack and had prepared more thoroughly. He had already built his forces and moved them into position. And as soon as the Egyptian forces left Pelusium, they were attacked and defeated by Antiochus IV and his Seleucid army, right? Then the Seleucians then seized Pelusium, giving them supplies and access to all of Egypt. He advanced into Egypt proper, conquering all but Alexandria, and there you go, capturing King Ptolemy, right? So this was partially achieved because Rome, the Ptolemaic Egypt's traditionally ally, was embroiled in the Third Macedonian War and was not willing to become involved elsewhere. So that's what he did, Antiochus Epiphanes. So that's what this verse is talking about here. verse 22 says, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant, all right, which was Ptolemy, the prince, because there was a covenant between them, and that was broken when they went to war again, and they captured the king, Ptolemy. Verse 23 says, and after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So Antiochus made Ptolemy VI a puppet ruler, and he made a league with Rome, right? I think that's Philometor. He makes him a puppet ruler. Let me see. Here you go. It's actually here. Actually says what I just said. It says there. To avoid alarming Rome, all right, after what they did against Egypt, Antiochus allowed Ptolemy VI to continue ruling, that's after they captured him, as a puppet king from Memphis. Upon Antiochus' withdrawal, the city of Alexandria chose a new king, one of Ptolemy's brother, also named Ptolemy VIII Eugatus. The Ptolemy brothers reconciled and agreed to rule Egypt jointly instead of fighting a civil war. All right? So that's what happened there. So that's what, and because he didn't want to upset Rome, right? So this is what this is talking about here. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So he makes a league with Rome, but he's still going to come up to attack, as you're going to see here. He makes him a puppet king after he captured him, right? And then after that, you're going to see here, and that will go into, it says here, in 168 BC, this is what it said, he worked deceitfully. Antiochus led a second attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus, right? That's what it says, he worked deceitfully. Before he reached Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Populus Lanus, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his army from Egypt and Cyprus or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic, all right? So that's him working deceitfully, right? They shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. So he captures the king of Ptolemy by invading it, all right? And then he says here, that's what it says there, he shall enter peacefully even upon the fattest places of the provinces, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. So I was reading this, but I wasn't showing you. That's verse 24. So that's part of him leading that second attack on Egypt, right, with the fleet to capture. And that's when the Romans come up and say, look, you need to back off. And before you leave this circle, they wanted him to give a reply, basically so he can take so he could take back to the Roman Senate, which was that Roman general at the time. So let's go to the next verse. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. So Antiochus Epiphanes, he does defeat, as we read earlier, king of the south, Ptolemy VI in Egypt, but then he goes into that second attack, and part of that is in the book of Maccabees as well. I think it's First Maccabees, I'm thinking of. Yeah, it's First Maccabees. Yeah. So the Maccabees speak about that prophecy here, but they're actually writing about the event as it's happening, the Maccabees. And it says, wherefore This is there. Now, when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 16. When the kingdom was established before Antiochus Epiphanes, he thought to reign over Egypt that he might have dominion of 2 realms, right? Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great navy, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 143rd year, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. See? His eyes got wider, he wanted more, but that's what that's talking about there in Daniel's 25. It says, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south, of a great army. That's him going back into Egypt. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, because he fled. The king of the south fled, as we read in the book of Maccabees. For they shall forecast devices against him. All right. So he flees, and that's during that second attack. It says, yea, they shall feed up the portion of his meat, and shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. So it's still talking about the invasion of the invasion of Egypt by the king of the north, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, basically. All right, and this is why the Romans got involved. It says, so that's still talking about the same event, but this is the complete capitulation of Egypt under Ptolemy VI. His empire falls, basically. Verse 27, it says, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. So both these kings shall do mischief. So these kings are the Ptolemy brothers, who will agree to rule Egypt jointly. All right. So we read that earlier. Was it in here? I read it. Yeah. So this is what this is talking about here. When it says to avoid, just highlight it so you can see. To avoid alarm in Rome, Antiochus allowed Ptolemy VI to continue ruling as a puppet king from Memphis. Upon Antiochus's withdrawal, the city of Alexandria chose a new king, one of Ptolemy's brothers, also named Ptolemy VIII Eugatus. The Ptolemy brothers reconciled and agreed to rule Egypt jointly instead of fighting a civil war. All right, so that's what they agreed to do after, Egypt, basically, because Egypt was taken down by Antiochus, and then he allowed these kings, Ptolemy VI, to rule, but as a puppet king, and the brother to rule in the other part as a puppet king, basically. So they agreed to rule together jointly instead of having a civil war and that. And this is why it says here, we go back to Daniel's 11, it says, and both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief. So even though they made the agreement, they're still plotting against one another, the two Ptolemy brothers, right? And they shall speak lies at one table. That's the agreement that they made to rule together. But it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. All right. So they made that joint agreement that yeah, we can rule together, but it doesn't end before them. It says it here. No, I can't see it here, but that's fine. But that's the agreement that they made. Then verse 28 says, then shall he return to his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, right? And his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So Antiochus Epiphanes returns back to Syria with his mind set on Israel, all right? Which is what we read in, is it here? We read that earlier, that his eyes is now turned on to Israel. He's now looking to invade Israel, basically, because that's the new prize now for them. So that's still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And so the holy covenant against the holy covenant, which are the children of Israel. So he's returned back to Syria with his mind set on Israel. He wants to now invade Israel. And we read this here. Let's quickly show you it here in First Maccabees. When it says here, verse 19, thus they got strong cities in the land of Egypt after conquering Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and the candlesticks of light and all the vessels thereof, right? And the table of shewbread and the pouring vessels and the vials and the censers of gold and the veil and the crown and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He also took the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly. Right? Therefore there was a great mourning in Israel in every place where they were. All right. So this is a Maccabees writing about the actual event when it happened. So Daniel's prophesying about this event that's going to take place, hundreds of years later. So Daniel says there, the angel says to Daniel basically, then shall he return to his own land with great riches. That's what we just read there. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant, because he raided Israel and he raided the temple. He emptied out Solomon's temple, all of its riches, and he shall do exploits and return unto his own land. And then he returned back to his own land, what we just read there in First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 23, when he said he took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. He took the hidden treasures which he found. He had taken it all away, and he went into his own land, having made a great massacre, and he spoke very proudly, which what we just read in First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 23 down to verse 25. So that prophecy was fulfilled because the Maccabees wrote about this taking place under Antiochus Epiphanes. So then verse 29 says, at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So Antiochus Epiphanes, once again, had carried out one successful invasion, plundering of Egypt, but on his return to Egypt, he's repelled by the Romans, who told him attacking Egypt is an act of war against Rome, basically. So that goes back to what we was reading earlier, where the Romans said unto him, was this part here, Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Romans envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, before you leave the circle, all right, give me, that's where we get the term from, we need to draw a line in the sand, on a situation. We just draw a line in the sand. It goes back to this here. The Romans had used it as a terminology in warfare. So they said to him, before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I may take back to the Roman Senate. This implied Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the circle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. All right. Weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then did populace agree to shake hands with him. Ancient sources and traditional historiography describe this day of Eleusis as a great humiliation for Antiochus IV that unhinged him for a time. Some more modern historians conjecture that Antiochus may have been more reconciled to this than ancient sources indicate, as the Roman intervention meant that Antiochus had been given an excuse to not undertake a potentially long and costly siege of Alexandria. He could instead return with treasure and not loot, having weakened the Egyptian state at little risk and cost compared to a larger scale invasion. All right. So he basically had to leave with his tail ducked between his legs, because the Romans said, look, before you leave, the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand and said, before you leave this circle, you need to give me a reply, mate. All right. So this is what this is talking about here. At the time appointed, so the same events, these verses are all talking about the same events, the same time cycle that we've been going through from around verse sort of like 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So that at the time appointed he shall return and come towards the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. Why? Because the Romans intervened and said you cannot invade Egypt, which is the south, right, where the king of the south was, and said, you cannot invade Egypt, basically, and that you need to give us an answer, right? They drew a line in the sand, right, as I said, and so you need to give them a reply so that they can take back to Rome. So this implied that the Rome would declare war if King Antiochus stepped out of the circle without committing to leave Egypt, which is the south, where the king of the south is, immediately. So that's that prophecy. Verse 29 is once again was fulfilled, as we showed you there, when that Roman general that was in charge, Gaius Populus Linnaeus, he was a general and a Roman of the Roman Republic, and he was a council in the Roman Senate. So that's what that's talking about, when Antiochus was coming down to ransack and invade completely, devastate Egypt in every sense. He was given a warning by the Romans. For the chips of Chittim shall come against him. So the chips of Chittim are the Romans, right? Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So for the ships of Chittim shall come against him. These are the Romans, right? Just so you understand, the ships of Chittim are the Romans who came against Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And that's when we read about there, going into the same thing. It's the same thing read about here. Is this is the ships of Chittim here, talking about the same event here. Gaius Populus Linnaeus, right? He was the general in charge at the time, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. That was the Romans that came down in the ships of Chittim, all right? And that even goes back to when it says here, where is it? Is it 8? There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. It says there. Yeah. Okay. Now I was going to get another part to show, but I don't need to go into that. That's fine. So that's what that's talking about there. All right. Once again. And when it says here, and he shall return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So indignation against the Holy Covenant is news of the Israelite revolt in Jerusalem that was led by Jason, the high priest, that enrages Antiochus. And that's in Maccabees. Don't remember exactly where it is. I don't really want to search for it, right? And he shall return having indignation against the Holy Covenant, that's the children of Israel, right? Because this is when the uprising is starting. So shall he do. He shall even return have intelligence with them that forsake the Holy Covenant, all right? So that indignation against the Holy Covenant is the news of the Israelites' revolt in Jerusalem that was led by Jason, the high priest. So that will kind of go back to, all right, go on. Back to, if I say, second Maccabees. And that's under the Maccabees, basically, because Jason is, where is it? These are the sons of Matthias, Ezra, Avram, Jonathan, Hussein, Amos, Aphias, Judas, Maccabees, Simon, Joanne. So the son or the grandson? But that's what that's talking about. That's basically referring to the revolt of the Maccabees now taking place now in Jerusalem. Verse 30. Verse 31, it says, "An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." So Antiochus attacks Jerusalem on his return, and he desecrates and pillages the holy temple, all right? And that's in First Maccabees chapter 1, again, I think verse 23. It says the motive behind this basically was his ambition to unify the great, his empire which left him by his father, extending all the way to India, right? And it was, that was kind of him. These people they were at that time were adopting the Greco-Roman system of culture, but that goes back to, if I believe, is it First Maccabees chapter 1? Let me just see if I'm right here. 23. Yeah. They're having a massacre. Where are we? And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So that is in, it's Maccabees that speaks about that. He took silver and gold and precious vessels, and he took the hidden treasures out of the vessels. And when he had taken away all, he went into his own land, having great massacre yet, spoken very proudly. Pulled down the ornaments before the temple. But that's them desecrating the temple. That's Antiochus Epiphanes desecrating the Solomon's temple when they came down on Israel, right? During the times of the Maccabees. So verse 32 says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their power shall be strong and do exploits, right? So such as do wickedly against covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. This is where I was reading about when we was reading in First Maccabees, I think it was verse 11, when they said, when we was reading in First Maccabees, verse 11, when it talks about Antiochus, that wicked root, Antiochus surname Epiphanes, and in verse 11 it says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. All right. So when it says, as such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, those are those Israelites that said, let us go and make a covenant with Antiochus, basically with these heathens, with the Greeks. And then it says, so that's the first part there. And then it says, when it says there, but the people that do know their power shall be strong and do exploits. All right. So these blasphemous acts of Antiochus Epiphanes stirred up the faithful Israelites to revolt, which was led by Matthias and his sons, especially Judas, right, who was successful at war of independence was waged against Antiochus, and that's where we get the Feast of Dedication from. But in First Maccabees? Hold on, so I can find it. This is where you get, and I was alluding to this earlier. These are the sons here. This is where these come into the play. In those days arose Matthias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, the priest of the sons of Jorab, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. And he had 5 sons, right? Joanna, called Cadius, Simon, called Thassius, Judas, who was called Maccabeus. That's where we get the name Maccabeus from, because his nickname was Maccabeus, which means the hammer. Eleazar, called Avaran, and Jonathan, whose surname was Aphius. And when he saw the blasphemies that were committed in Judah and Jerusalem, he said, woe is me, wherefore was I born, right, to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers, right? And then it says, her temple is become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets. Her young men with the sword of the enemy. And what nation has not had a part in her kingdom and gotten of her spoils? And all her ornaments have taken away. Of a free woman, she has become a bond slave, right? Talk about the Israelites. And behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and our glory is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it, all right? So this is what we're getting at, because they profaned the sanctuary, the abominations that they did in the sanctuary in Solomon's temple. So this is where the Maccabees now are fully involved in this war against Antiochus Epiphanes. So it says, this is what it says, but the people that do know their power, starting with the Maccabees, shall be strong and do exploits, right? And that starts with the wars of the Maccabees against the Greeks. So that's verse 32. That's what that's talking about. That's the revolt of the Maccabees kicking into play now. And verse 33 says, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil, and by spoil many days. All right. So, that's kind of goes into like we're talking about the future prophecy and captivity and subjection under Antiochus Epiphanes, the captivity and subjection under Antiochus. A long period was foretold in which the Israelites would fall by the sword and by the flame, by captivity, under the persecution of Antiochus and the Greeks. Hence, we go into the wars of the Maccabees against Antiochus Epiphanes, that called themselves Greeks at the time. All right, so this is what that's talking about. And they that understand amongst the people shall instruct many. So those that understood, who they are, the Israelites, their power, their faith, that. This is when Judas and his crew. When he said, first form of the king's commandment, everyone from the religion of their father. Yeah, so this is why it says here. It says, then Matthias answered and spake with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him, right? He's speaking to the Israelites, Matthias now, right? Which is the father of the sons of the Maccabees, right? He's the father of the 5 sons, right? It says, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion, under Antiochus Epiphanes' dominion, right, the Greeks, obey him and fall away everyone from the religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments. So they've taken on this Greek God's beliefs, lifestyle, all those other nations that are under the dominion of Antiochus Epiphanes. So Matthias is speaking to his people, probably standing in the square or somewhere where Israelites gather together in high numbers. And he's speaking with a loud voice saying, look, although these other nations that have been subjugated by Antiochus Epiphanes have bowed to his heathenistic lifestyle and bowed to his gods and given up their own beliefs and culture and so forth, it says, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. Yahweh forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either in the right hand or in the left. Now, when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all the sacrifices on the altar, which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment, which thing when Matthias saw, he was inflamed with zeal. His reins trembled, neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. So that was one of the Israelites that came and said, yeah, I'm up for being Greek and taking on all of these heathen lifestyles, and I'm going to show to the people that we can be like these Greeks. And Matthias was fuming when he saw one of his own people, present themselves to the rest of the Israelites, say, yeah, let's follow the Greeks, let's do what they're doing, let's listen to what Antiochus Epiphanes is telling us to do, because they wanted them to sacrifice pigs in the altar and to eat pork and do all of these things to get the people away from the Most High, from Yahweh, basically in that. But Matthias weren't having none of it. So this is where we go into the times of the wars of the Maccabees against Antiochus the Great. So that goes back to this here. And they that stand amongst the people shall instruct many. So Matthias was speaking to the people to say, look, we can't be doing what the rest of these heathen nations, the rest of these other Gentile nations are doing and taking on the cultures and beliefs of Antiochus and the Greeks, what they're trying to force upon the people. He says, yet they shall fall by the sword and by the flame and by captivity and by spoil many, many days. Because that's when they're going to war now against the Greeks. It says, now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So certain Israelites, as we showed you there, who Matthias killed, signed up for this Greek lifestyle. So in here, basically, when it says, but the people that do know their power shall be strong and do exploits, all right, which is what we read. These, the blasphemy acts, the blasphemous acts of Antiochus, which stirred up the faithful Israelites to revolt, the Maccabees. So that was led by Matthias and his sons, and especially Judas, who was a successful war, who who waged a successful war of independence against Antiochus, which goes back to the, as I said earlier, the Feast of Dedication, right? So Antiochus decided to side with the Hellenized Jews in order to consolidate his empire and to strengthen his hold over the region. So he outlawed Israelite religious rites and traditions that kept by observant Jews and ordered the worship of Zeus, their supreme god, and so forth and so on, right? So you get all those, that's what it says, my many shall cleave to them with flatteries, all right? Verse 35, it says, and some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed, all right? So that's talking about the Israelites. Some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed, all right? Talking about the children of Israel. Verse 36, it says, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the gods of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. So the son of Antiochus III, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, so he's a member of the Hellenistic, as you know, Greek Seleucid dynasty, basically. So it's kind of talking about him once again. The king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. It's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, basically. All right. And shall speak marvelous things against the Most High, and shall prosper till indignation be accomplished. For that is determined. For that is determined shall be done. So it's talking about the things that Antiochus Epiphanes was going to do, you know, and was going to do to the children of Israel, because he believed that he was a god, literally. So it says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, right? But he shall magnify himself above all, right? So Antiochus Epiphanes, once again, talking about the same person. We could go into what is it, Second Maccabees, I think it's around chapter 9, but this is once again talking about Antiochus. He says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, all right, nor the desire of women, because he believed he was a god. He didn't even reverence his own Greek gods anymore. He was the new god, all right? Nor regard any god, because he saw himself as the god. Antiochus Epiphanes, he was this all-seeing, talking power now. For he shall magnify himself above all. Right? That's why they called him Antiochus Epiphanes, because Epiphany means the mad one. It says, but in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Right? So they called him Epiphanes the mad one, which is like I said, it's a word play on his title, basically. But you know, he saw himself as the God. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God of whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. All right, so he's creating his own God in his own image, basically. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land of gain. All right? Same Antiochus Epiphanes. It's all talking about what he's doing, basically, to assert his power. And at that time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So you got the Seleucids and the Ptolemies before them, right? So there was kind of like a policy drastically reversed by Antiochus IV, resulting in harsh persecutions and a revolt against his rule. And once again, you got the Maccabee revolt taking place. This is at that time, at the time of the end, because we're coming to the end of his lifetime now. So the king of the south, right? The Ptolemies push at him, the Ptolemies, right? I think it's Ptolemy the sixth at the time. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, right? Antiochus Epiphanes, with chariots and with horsemen of many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Then it says, he shall enter also into the glorious land, which is Israel, the promised land, right? And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. So these countries escaped out of his hand, but Israel was the price. That's why it's referred to as the glorious land. Antiochus decides to side with the Hellenized Jews, as I said, to consolidate his empire and to strengthen his hold over the region. So he outlawed all, Israelite religion, rites, traditions by observant Israelites. Basically, he wanted them to worship Zeus, as a supreme god. But he himself, because Zeus, he kind of was looked at on. It's to say Zeus was his father. He was creating a god of his own image. So he had now entered into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. Right. The glorious land is Israel, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of Ammon. All right. So the cities of Jerusalem were destroyed because of the resistance under the Maccabees. Because remember, the Maccabees fled into the mountains, and this is where we get the term guerrilla warfare. They was fighting a guerrilla warfare with Antiochus, and many were slaughtered. And Antiochus established a military Greek citadel called, I think it was called Acra, something like that. And I think it's in Second Maccabees. Let's see, Second Maccabees. And that goes into the super Jews to populous fathers. Yeah. So this is, it kind of talks about it here, what he was doing when he entered into the glorious land. It says, now after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws, right? That's King Antiochus Epiphanes, the fourth, right? To depart from their laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of the Most High, and to pollute also the temple of Jerusalem and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Gerizim of Jupiter, of defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwell in the place. The coming of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. The altar also was filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or an ancient fast, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. Right? And this is what they did. And in that day of the king's birth, every month they were brought by the bitter constraints to eat of the sacrifices. And when the fast of the Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go and in procession to Bacchus carrying ivy. It's what you kind of see the Christians do today, right? All this madness. It all goes back to this Hellenization of these Edomites. It says, moreover, they went out a decree to the neighboring cities of the heathen by the suggestions of the Ptolemies against the Jews that they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices. So that's what's going on. This is what's prophesied, but that's what's going on when he entered the glorious land. In verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, right? But some escape, but we were the main target for this devil. He shall stretch out forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. All right, going back to the Ptolemies. So Iran, I think he led a second attack on Egypt, which we read about earlier, with a fleet that was captured in Cyprus, and he reached Alexandria and so forth. And that's still talking about the second attack that he did onto Egypt, basically, Antiochus. It says, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and of all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. All right. Antiochus Epiphanes, again, part of his war against Egypt, the king of the south, the Libyans, these countries that didn't escape his wrath, that he went and raided and took their riches during that time. It says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and utterly to make away with many. So he kind of recognized a potential danger in the east, but was unwilling to give up control of Judea, right, at the time. So he sent a commander named, I think his name was Lysias, to deal with the Maccabees. So while the king himself, Antiochus, led the main Seleucid army against the Parthians, right? Antiochus had initial success in that campaign, including the occupation of Armenia, right? But he died suddenly, as you're going to see, of a disease around 160 something BC. And so he says, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, which is him leading those campaigns, right, against those countries, and utterly to make away many. So it says, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountains, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. All right, because he ultimately dies. All right. Sorry. He shall come to his end, and none shall help him. That was the last verse I was in, right? Yeah, that was the last verse. What happened there? New chapter. Where are we? That's 11. Previous chapter. Sorry. I'm moving too fast. Yeah. Yeah, so it's the last verse, yeah. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So, this is where he dies of, I think it's bowel cancer. This is where he comes to his end. Let's just show you, because the Maccabees speak about it as well. They write about when this devil comes to his end. I think it's 2 Maccabees chapter 9. We're going to show you where he comes to his end. So go straight to the point, because we're going to finish it here anyway. Remember him, because he dies with bowel cancer. Well, what we would call today bowel cancer, I believe. Judgment, Jews, and the pains would not cease for this. In the form of supplication, not disturbing mind health, and having great hope to escape his sickness, but considering that even his father would put my son to me. Yeah, here it is. Sorry. This is what I'm looking for here. 2 Maccabees. So this is where he met his end. He says here, for I am persuaded that he, understanding my mind, will favorably and graciously yield to your desires, right? Thus the murderer and blasphemer, having suffered most grievously as he entreated other men, so died he a miserable death in a strange country in the mountains, right? And Philip, that was brought up with him, carried away his body, who also fearing the son of Antiochus went to Egypt to Ptolemais Philopater. So that's where he died. He had something in his stomach. He had some sort of wound or cancerous thing in his stomach where he died, basically. So the Lord Almighty, power of Israel, smote him with an incurable and invisible plague. And as soon as he had spoken these words, a pain in his bowels that was remedies came upon him, and sore torment. So that's where he died. And it kind of tells you here, for the purse, rage, borders, yeah, that's fine, yeah. But that's where he died. Grievous is there, I thought that's to kill the common, yeah. Yeah, he kind of says, as for me, I was weak, or else I would have remembered kindly your honor and goodwill, returning out of Persia and being taken with a grievous disease. I thought it necessary to care for the common safety of all, right? Not distrusting mine health, but having great hope to escape this sickness, which he didn't. But considering that even my father at that time, he led an army into the high country to appoint the successor. So he didn't escape that sickness, and that's where he died, basically. As it says there, he was brought, and that murderer and blasphemer, having suffered most grievously as he entreated other men, so died he miserably, a miserable death in a strange country and in the mountains. And that was his end, Antiochus Epiphanes IV. So really, I knew it would take a very long time to go through all of this. That is Daniel's chapter 11 in a nutshell. basically, from start to finish. Every single prophetic prophecy in Daniel's chapter 11 has been fulfilled, as I showed you there. And I tried to bring up as much history as possible for you. Every single prophecy has been fulfilled. And that was Antiochus Epiphanes' end. So I pray you're edified. Nearly 3 hours, but I knew it would take a very long time. That's why I had to really carve out some serious time to do this. I knew it would take a very long time to go through it because there's a lot of information in Daniel chapter 11. Pray you're edified as always. All praise and glory to the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, and to his only begotten Son, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and to the elders of Great Millstone. For those of you that were able to stay with it all, all praises, man. To you guys that was able to stay all from start to finish. It's a long video. For those of you that may be watching it for the first time, you may have to watch it in 2 parts, basically in that. But that's the full breakdown of Daniel's chapter 11, from start to finish, from verse 1 to verse 45. Every single prophecy has been fulfilled. It's all based on the 6 Syrian wars, and it starts with the 4 Persian kings, and it ends with Antiochus Epiphanes the 4th, the king of the Seleucid Empire. So shalom, 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 all praises.